for the quorum, I guess that's first.
Yes, I will do that. Commissioner Westerberg,
Here.
Commissioner Rogers,
Here.
and Chair Linwall.
Here.
You've got a quorum.
Okay, I think the next item is we need a motion to suspend the rules to allow this meeting to be conducted via Zoom.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All right. Commissioner Westerberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers,
Yes.
Chair Linwall.
Yes.
Got a quorum.
I guess next would be approval of the minutes from April 14th. A motion to approve.
I was not on the committee yet at that point, so I can't vote on that. So with only three of us, it's good.
Yes, Commissioner Westerberg.
I will move to approve the minutes.
All right, I'll second, but I have a clarification that needs to be made. When we set the date for tonight's meeting, we didn't do it through a formal vote. We did it kind of by consensus. So with that clarification,
Right.
because I was not moving and seconding my own motion.
Okay. That would be Commissioner Westerberg
Yes.
and Chair Linwall,
Yes.
and Commissioner Rogers, you want to abstain?
I wasn't on the committee yet, so it's not fair for me to vote on the minutes.
All right.
Okay, I guess then the next is the continued discussion of the proposed text amendment to the zoning ordinance, which addresses occupancy of dwelling units. And this is still in the discussion phase. We haven't had any specific language, but I'd like to make a few comments. We have a staff presentation, but for those of you who are kind of new to this whole issue, I know one member of the public who spoke at the last meeting basically said, I feel like I've dropped into the middle of a movie and I don't know, what the plot is. And so what I'd like to do is explain a little bit about who the commission is, what our role is, and kind of what the zoning ordinance is. So first of all, the Plan Commission is a 9-member commission. We're appointed by the mayor. We are, let's see, did I? Oh, I'm sorry. We had a different, we were supposed to elect a committee chair. Missed that. And I'll kind of start with that. The reason that we're going to elect a new committee chair is that the commissioner who was the chair of the Plan Commission, his term expired earlier this month. And I have been elected, I was serving as vice chair and have since been elected chair of the commission. So on the commission, we like to kind of spread things around. So it would be appropriate to select a new committee chair. So with that, do we either have any volunteers or a nomination?
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Rogers.
I will accept the nomination.
Okay, I will second it.
All right, I will call the roll. Commissioner Westerberg,
Yes.
Chair Lidwell,
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers, will have you abstain on that vote. All right, so majority has it.
Okay. However, I would also like to volunteer to kind of lead this discussion since you haven't been part of the others.
That was going to be my suggestion, since rather than coming in the third meeting of 3 to suddenly take over the reins, I would appreciate that.
Okay. Anyway, getting back to kind of who the commission is. So we're a 9-person commission. We're appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the city council. And the zoning committee is a subcommittee of the full plan commission. And we're regular citizens, just like all of you who are on the call. I mean, just a little bit about me. I'm transitioning into retirement after a 40+ year career as an urban planner. I started with the city of Evanston, serving as staff to the Preservation Commission and the Plan Commission. And the last 10 years or so have been spent working with community and public housing residents to develop neighborhood revitalization plans for low-income neighborhoods with distressed public housing. And as kind of as part of that effort, you know, affordable housing and equity are big pieces. Also, by way of disclosure, given the topic, I live next door to a house that was purchased by an investor a couple of years ago after my longtime neighbor died. And I, by chance met the property manager about a month ago and asked how many people were living there. And so I am living next door to a house with 5 or 6 individuals. I don't know if they're students. I don't know, I know they like to play beer pong in the backyard, but I have not experienced some of the other issues that many of the folks on the call have heard about or have indicated are issues. But so I want to disclose that as just part of for the record. And going back to what the role of the Plan Commission and the Zoning Committee is, the role of the Plan Commission, we're a recommending body. We don't make final decisions on anything. There are 2 major functions. The first has to do with making recommendations on proposed text and map amendments to the zoning ordinance, and then also making recommendations on plan developments following a public hearing. The other main function of the Plan Commission is the comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan, for those of you who are not familiar, is basically a statement of community values and recommendations for incorporating those policies and objectives into the future development regulations. So there are 4 sections to the comprehensive plan. In our last plan dates to 2000. That was the most recent one. Typically in a community that's growing will have a comprehensive plan updated every 5 to 10 years. Ours, in a fully built out community like Evanston, 10 to 15 years is kind of the norm. And ours is, as I said, was last adopted in the year 2000, although there have been some subsequent sector area plans, West Evanston, the Central Street Plan, and frankly, the downtown plan have all happened since then. And the comprehensive plan is really kind of the basis for the zoning ordinance. So in approving or considering text and map amendments, compatibility with the comprehensive plan is one of the standards that is used to evaluate proposals. And really kind of the comprehensive plan is a matter of helping to find a balance between potentially conflicting ideas for how best to enhance the community. And there are, relevant to this discussion, there are really two. There's a section in the land use chapter that deals with neighborhood. And the neighborhood goal is to help enhance existing assets of neighborhoods while recognizing that each neighborhood contributes to the overall social and economic quality of Evanston. And then there's also a housing chapter. And the goal for that is to maintain and enhance the desirability and range of choice in terms of style and price that the housing stock offers both buyers and renters. So those are kind of the underpinning, development philosophy that goes into our decisions. Now, the zoning ordinance, again, it's divided into, it's really kind of the rules of the road for land use. So it includes rules for kind of how hearings are held, the administrative process for reviewing land use and development proposals. The city is divided up into a series of zoning districts, each with a set of uses that are allowed either by right, so permitted use, or uses that are require special approvals either through the Zoning Board of Appeals or the Plan Commission in the case of plan developments. And then finally, there's a section of that really has definition of terms. So it includes that, and that's kind of where the definition of family lives, but there are also definitions on various kinds of dwelling types. Setbacks are defined, the method for calculating building heights, a whole range of things. And so, things like in the use mix, rooming houses are defined in the zoning ordinance, but the regulation happens in a different section of the city code. So it's really important to kind of understand what the zoning ordinance is. And again, as I said, it's also really important to understand that while the Plan Commission makes recommendations with respect to proposed zoning text amendments and really land use policy, it's the city council that makes the decisions. So for those of you who are particularly concerned about the definition of family, how it's defined, there's both the opportunity to express your concerns here to the Plan Commission, but ultimately the decision will be made by the City Council. So I think with that, as I said, there are a number of other codes that impact families, and I've asked staff to kind of go through some of the basic ordinances and sections of the code that are applicable or relevant to this discussion. And just kind of, for those of you who are not going to sit and read the city code, there are a number of essentially sections of the code that cover, operation of boards and commissions, that cover streets and public rights of way. The zoning is its own unique section of the code. There are public safety sections that address. That's where you will find the public nuisance ordinance. And then there's a whole section on housing regulations. And that, I think, with that, I think I'll turn it over to Megan and the other staff to present provide an overview, so everyone can kind of come to this discussion from the same place. So.
Okay, I hope everyone can see this. So I want to give as brief as possible, overview that will essentially kind of be a review of things that have been brought up or discussed in the previous meetings, as well as some additional information that staff has added over time. So for a little bit more background, at the Planning and Development Committee meeting, the subcommittee of the City Council, we had an aldermanic reference in September of last year to actually look into discussing and possibly modifying our zoning ordinance with regards to occupancy of dwelling units and the definition of family. When we initially brought this to Plan Commission for discussion, we had some initial recommendations to think about, and those included exploring the use of occupancy standards from our existing building and property maintenance code for both owner-occupied and rental dwellings, consideration of an option to limit the maximum occupancy of all dwelling units, regardless of size, to no more than 8 occupants, whether related or unrelated. And if there's any dwelling unit proposed for more than those 8 occupants, then they would have to apply for a special use as a rooming house. And this would be in all residential districts. And finally, the last initial recommendation was consideration of eliminating any reference to family in the zoning regulations for the occupancy of dwelling units and essentially within the entire zoning ordinance. So as I mentioned, this was brought to the whole Plan Commission for discussion in November of last year. And it's been in the zoning committee for the past few months, February 24th, and then a couple of weeks ago on April 14th. Now, some of the main discussion points are listed here. I do want to go through these so everyone is aware. So I think that one of the main discussion points was the purpose and benefits of retaining or doing away with the family definition with regards to occupancy standards. So that discussion centered on if keeping or removing the family definition would actually help with enforcement of occupancy and the city's broader goal of providing safe, affordable housing option for residents. This also touched on the impact to residents with different cultural backgrounds, with Western students that happen to be living off campus, and members of other protected classes, including those who may live in shared housing. We also discussed at length over the meetings the benefits and challenges of applying occupancy rules across both owner-occupied and rental units. And so this was where discussion about using square footage and housing configuration for determining the maximum occupancy came about. And so this would have been enforced by having landlords submit floor plans when they were applying for rental registration and having floor plans for owner-occupied units being submitted around the time of a transfer stamp request. So once we get those documents, maximum occupancy would then be determined and the occupancy load would be provided for the owners of those units. And we also mentioned increasing the maximum number of unrelated people who could live within a dwelling unit. Another aspect that has also been discussed at length was how to enforce the new and existing regulations, as well as some of the student nuisances that have been brought up. There has been some discussion about creating operating agreements and adjudication once violations are given, and the determination of liability found in the hearing to rental units. Owner-occupied enforcement, we discussed, was usually done on a complaint basis. So there's no consistent enforcement with regards to the owner-occupied units. And the enforcement of existing nuisance ordinances and property maintenance codes, and then also addressing the need of additional staff in order to maintain these occupancy records and to conduct inspections. And I think this was generally needed now and for whatever changes may end up happening to the code. There was also discussion of how the zoning code is not necessarily the place to address occupancy standards directly or to control human behavior, or those nuisances that have been brought up. Generally, the zoning code regulates land use and not the people that use that land. And then at the previous meeting a couple of weeks ago, Commissioner Lindwall provided an idea of using the administrative review use process, which has not been yet approved, but is proposed for a select number of commercial uses, and possibly using that type of process to permit uses of homes that would have a higher occupancy. So this is the current definition of family. I won't completely read in detail, but I'll leave it up for a little bit. As you can see, it's a bit lengthy. Type A through C is relatively short and straightforward. Type D is very specific. And in discussion, we basically came about that this was specifically for one particular use. So changing this is definitely something we need to consider that use. And I believe Sarah Flax, who's on this call, has actually had some discussions with Reba Fellowship regarding this use and whether they would be okay with the changes, which I believe they are. I'll let Sarah provide a little bit more detail on that one.
Yes, thank you, Megan. I spoke with David Jansen and also had emailed communication with a number of other members of Reba Fellowship, and also spoke with Adam, who is currently managing some of their properties. Reba has no problem with not having the type D family definition. In fact, they were very open to anything that would allow people greater choice in who they choose to live with. You know, one of the things that is interesting about the type D family is it's the only one that is restricted. Go ahead to the next page, please, Megan. They specifically are not allowed in R1 and R2. And also they have an interesting restriction on the number of motor vehicles that they can have that we don't have for any other type of family, which certainly seems to be not a particularly good thing to have in our code. But Reba was, as I say, absolutely not, you know, had no problem with the type D family being removed, as long as it was square footage and type of, you know, the unit configuration. They thought that seemed like a very fair and reasonable way to regulate occupancy.
All right, thank you, Sarah. This particular slide deals with the zoning codes, speaking to dwelling unit occupancy. So as Sarah was mentioning, A speaks specifically to type D families. And we had some discussion, which this actually should be item B, regarding the no dwelling unit, which contains less than 1,000 square feet of floor area. There had been discussion of essentially, I think, eliminating this particular one, considering the recently passed amendments to the code that permit coach houses and accessory dwelling units and efficiency homes, not really breaking down the square footage in that particular way. So, and then also this particular item uses some archaic language. So I think there was pretty much agreement on eliminating that last part as well. This particular slide speaks to the existing property maintenance calculations for how maximum occupancy is determined. I think at the last meeting, Angelique Schnur provided an example of how that calculation is actually done. As you can see, it is based on square footage to a certain point, but not just a flat. If you've got 1,000 square feet, you can have this many people. It depends on the living space, dining space, and the bedroom space combined essentially. But then also the bedrooms or the sleeping rooms must meet particular standards. So you can't use that particular bedroom as a throughway to get to a different part of the home. So there are specific standards that are part of this calculation as well. And as Commissioner Lingwall mentioned, we do have existing nuisance regulations. Nuisances are generally addressed throughout all of the city code. For the most part, you will end up seeing maybe one or two sentences that say, if a particular property or use doesn't meet the standards within this code, they're considered a public nuisance. But there are several titles that have more robust discussion of nuisances and how to address those. And those are seen in Title V, Housing Regulations, Title VIII, Health and Sanitation, and Title IX, Public Safety. So in Title V, this speaks a lot to property maintenance requirements, rental registration, the responsibilities of landlords and tenants. And this is also where the city's fair housing and inclusionary housing ordinances are. In Title VIII, there's a specific chapter, Chapter 3, that specifically lists various types of nuisances and also addresses abatement and prevention of those nuisances as well as prohibited actions. In Title IX, Chapter 5, Section 4 specifically mentions nuisance premises, and this defines nuisance premises and provides a procedure for addressing those premises. So with regards to fair housing and our human rights ordinances, familial status is protected under Evanston's Fair Housing Ordinance within Chapter 5 and its Human Rights Ordinance within Chapter 21. The definition that is within familial status is substantially different from what is in the zoning code and is actually focused more on preventing discrimination against families with children. So as you can see here, there's language that specifically addresses a parent or some person that has some kind of legal custody of children, and how you essentially want to not have that type of discrimination occur. And just for a little bit more background, we have had some fair housing issues in Evanston. And since 2003, those include property owners advertising rentals for students only. And of our housing discrimination cases that have been filed with HUD or IDHR, race was most common at 29%, disability at 27%, and national origin at 19%. And we've also heard anecdotal reports of different treatments of female-headed households with teenage boys who were seeking rental units. So Commissioner Lingwall did touch on this. There are different aspects of the plan that could be called on to address what's before the committee and will be before the commission, specifically in Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, which deal with neighborhoods and housing. Some of the key objectives in Chapter 2 include maintaining the appealing character of neighborhoods while guiding the change, promoting activities that help strengthen communities and improve neighborhood quality of life, and recognizing the effect of housing on the quality of neighborhoods. In Chapter 3, some of the key objectives include maintaining and enhancing property values and positive perceptions of housing in Evanston, addressing concerns about cost and affordability, preserving Evanston's historic residential character and ambiance, as well as addressing poor housing conditions which detract from neighborhood quality of life. So since in the 21 years since the plan has been approved, a lot of the main ideals have remained largely the same, but as has been mentioned throughout the discussion, people's views of familial status rather and households has changed, and it's evolved to include a number of different situations. And also within the objectives that are listed here, there's also a good amount of collaboration that is listed that should be encouraged. And so amongst neighbors, between different institutions, students, et cetera, that's also a part of what has been discussed. So this is actually the end of the formal presentation. There are a few maps if someone wanted to review those are the same that have been included in previous meetings. So if there are any questions, I can pull those back up.
Okay. Thank you, Megan. I would actually, I spent my weekend reading all of Title V, which is the housing regulations. And while Megan is correct in terms of the fair housing ordinance, there also in that ordinance is a definition of dwelling unit, which is essentially a room or group of rooms designed for occupancy by one family as defined in this Evanston zoning ordinance. So there are links between how occupancy is defined in the fair housing ordinance and the zoning definition of family. The other point I would like, or piece I would like to make the public aware of is that we have a chapter in the housing regulations that requires the registration of rental residential buildings, which really, is designed so that you know who the property manager is, and so you can, it's a health and safety issue. But one of the registration requirements is that the property owners are supposed to supply a floor plan of each dwelling unit with room dimensions. So I think one question that I'd like to have staff respond to is, the degree to which landlords are providing that information, because it really kind of speaks directly to kind of the proposed enforcement mechanism that staff has proposed. So if somebody could speak to that at this point, I would appreciate it.
I can, thank you. Angelique Schneider, Property Maintenance Supervisor. That ordinance was recently changed to accept the registration as part of the ADU requirements. And we made that floor plan with room size measurements part of that. And so any property that is newly registered does not pass the process until it submits all of the documents. Previously, when owners registered their property, they had to list the unit numbers, but there wasn't necessarily a requirement for floor plans and room size measurements. That's new. Any newly registered property has to submit the registration form and the floor plan in order to move forward. We won't move it forward without those.
All right, so that the initial batch of rental registrations, the property owners were not required to submit floor plans?
That is correct. Any of the original rental registration forms just had handwritten notes on the back about the unit numbers and their IDs, 15 units, unit 1A, unit 2B, unit 3C. It didn't have floor plans attached to it.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners, do you have questions of staff at this point, or should we open it up and hear from members of the public who would like to speak?
Question, Megan, does the city have data on where university students live in terms of how many in each ward? Is there any kind of information on that?
No, I don't know that it would go as deep as by ward. I think we do have some general information of where some students do live, and Sarah might be able to fill in.
Actually, it's very difficult to get information on where students live. We couldn't get it when we were working on the census data, which was really quite a challenge. Although Northwestern would communicate with their students about the census via emails and stuff like that. One of the challenges that they explained was they have students who live in family dwellings that, would never have been on campus. They have a lot of graduate students. They have, they don't necessarily track their student body completely by each campus. So when we were asking if we could get more detail on exactly where the student population was, and we couldn't get the detail, any specific detail on that. We know just by common sense and proximity that a large number of them live in the first ward and the parts of the 7th and the 5th that are closest to campus. But we also know that there are a significant number of grad students, especially, who seem to live in South Evanston. The train is a short ride away, and we also know that there are parts of the 5th ward west of the of Green Bay Road that have significant student housing. Wesley, for example, there's a block or two of Wesley north of Emerson that has historically had a fair number of students living there. So it's really not, it's perhaps more diverse. They live in more parts of Evanston than we may be thinking in some cases.
In a similar way, we talked about the fact that there were a number of 4-bedroom units that could not be rented to 4 people because of the rule. Do we have actually data on how many buildings have that particular issue and where they might be located?
Well, I've never tried to look at it exactly. We could get certain data from the housing reports that are done by the census. I haven't looked for that specifically. But, I know anecdotally, for example, when we were doing the neighborhood stabilization program and we were buying a number of condos down in the 8th ward, in those, some of the buildings were the big courtyard buildings, and others were, there was one 3-flat that had absolutely magnificently huge units. They had 4 or 5 bedrooms, and they actually had space that was quite obviously for a live-in servant at the very back of the building. So, in places where you have older buildings that are now rental, a number of those buildings were built for, as family housing and have really very large units. There's a real mix, but we don't have that information by geography.
Okay,
ward.
understood. The reason I ask is only because I think for the larger plan commission, it might be helpful to have some actual quantitative numbers in terms of what would be the impact if we took away the 3 unrelated rule in terms of expanding that particular segment of the market. That's all.
Mm-hmm. We do have we have a shortage of large units that are rental overall especially their affordable rental throughout Evanston, but that's not necessarily based on the total of available units of that size. That's based on their rental rates.
I'd like to kind of follow up on that for when we get to the full commission. I think it would be very helpful to have some information on kind of the supply and demand for rental housing for the larger families with kids, like, with 3+ kids, that could probably take advantage of either, the larger multifamily units or in particular the single family units that are currently being used as student housing. So to the extent you have information on the price ranges, that would be helpful. I'm not sure that that's real easy to get, but certainly some information on kind of what the supply and demand is for those larger family units, because I think that kind of speaks to who we should be trying to prioritize from a policy perspective with respect to the units with 3 or 4 bedrooms or more bedrooms. Commissioner Rogers, I know you're new. Do you have any initial thoughts?
I mean, I don't have any particular questions or comments at this time. I mean, obviously, this is something that's been discussed in the city for many, many, many years. So it's not like I've not heard discussion or participated in discussion on this over the years. But I guess the one question I have that I don't know if I missed an answer to it in documentation I've been reading through what's been going on. How do other cities tend to handle this sort of thing? Is this 3 unrelated, a totally unique Evanston thing? Do we find it a lot in towns of our size that also have universities? Is it in smaller towns? Where do we find this sort of thing?
Pretty much all over, but I'll defer to staff as well. There's usually, I believe the Supreme Court going back many years determined that a zoning ordinance can be, you can limit or regulate the number of unrelated people that can live together. You can't ban them, but you can set a number. So the numbers vary a lot. I think in some of the past, some communities use 3 and 4 seems to be the most common.
I was just wondering.
I've seen, but
yeah, I was just wondering if, I mean, you know, being able to do it and actually doing it are kind of 2 different things. And so I was wondering, communities of our size, communities that have universities, is this where we tend to see this? And is it in a majority of them? Is it kind of, we're in the minority here? And I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that from staff.
I believe that staff sent out a survey kind of asking communities, and Megan, I don't know if you have any more information.
And I don't know that we have any information with regards to that. I don't think we've gotten any additional responses. But the 3 unrelated, 4 unrelated is pretty common. I will say that. But there are a number of communities of varying sizes. Some with a number of them with universities who are essentially updating how they approach student housing and just in general, the occupancy standards. So Evanston is not alone in its current
I didn't
type of
assume it was
enforcement.
alone, but
Yeah, we're definitely not alone in that type of enforcement. But that definitely is not to say that there aren't other communities, again, of varying sizes, smaller and larger, and even going to like a county or state level that are seeking to update how they look at occupancy.
and this is something you probably don't know an answer to, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, just to get it out there. In towns and cities where we do see this, is this something that is applied citywide? Is it applied in areas near campus? Is it applied to specific zoning districts? You know, I'm thinking, you know, personally, I live in the 8th Ward. I live in a courtyard building. My entire block is courtyard buildings. You know, in some of these buildings, there are 4 bedrooms. I have to believe that there are 4 people living in some of those, and they can be purchased by graduate students, which we have a couple that live in my building. So I'm just kind of wondering, you know, something like this would not have an impact in my neighborhood necessarily, which is an R5, that it would have in an R1 district. And so I'm kind of wondering if you have any indication as to how that's treated by different cities.
Yeah, it's, again, there are a variety of different ways that it's been treated. And Sarah, you can join in with additional information. There have been, I think, in some of the past memorandums, you have looked at some other locations, not necessarily ones that have a significant student population, but there are a few who have been struggling with this the same as Evanston has, and are trying to find ways to better approach how they do things. I would say it's not a consistently homogenous way of approaching the issue. I can't think of specific cities off the top of my head at the moment.
I can think of, Megan, I can think of just a handful. I mean, and we can look back at the data because this was from, I think in 2013 when we were working on this same thing. I remember St. Paul, Minnesota had a specific, tried to use almost more like zoning around St. Thomas College, where they were apparently having an off-campus student issue that was, and so there are cases where we've seen communities with colleges or universities do specific zoning or take specific action around the university area. There's also something that I was just looking at very recently, which is a major city that is full of universities and colleges, and that's Boston. Boston has actually, I think, really quite amazing what they call public nuisance properties ordinance, which is community-wide. I mean, it's all of Boston, and it has some similarities to our nuisance property ordinance, but more important, it defines a series of other public nuisances that sound remarkably like the types of things we have when you have large groups of young people behaving not very quietly in a neighborhood. Let me just, for example, and a problem property, they call them problem properties, can be defined as anything as a property that has not fewer than 4 times within the preceding 12-month period had any of the following, but not limited to: disturbing the peace, trespassing, underage drinking, or assault. And they have that's just one example. And they have interestingly enough, an air pollution control commission, which weighs in on noise problems. So for extreme, things that violate their noise levels can be declared a problem property. And they have a very interesting way of going through of applying penalties, which can be both against the tenant and the owner of properties like this, and some significant fines. And they also have a process that we've talked about, which is a remediation process where they have to file a management plan. So it's an interesting, I really literally just happened upon this earlier today, but it's really an example of an ordinance that I think more effectively deals with the types of problems that we're hearing about around the university in terms of student behavior. And, let's face it, most of the time it sounds that when we get these kinds of nuisances, it's not necessarily the people who are living at the property that are the only ones causing the nuisance. It's the umpteen friends and stuff that come along with it. So, again, I don't know that the number of people and their relationship living in the property are necessarily the biggest issue. It's the behavior that can include people outside that. So I think that these are the types of things that we could look at to strengthen and reinforce our own ability to declare problem properties or anything else that are caused in any neighborhood. Boston also has a very robust and transparent process, because you can go on their website and find the problem property web page that even maps them and lists them all. So you can imagine that if somebody's trying to rent properties and they show up on the problem property list, that's probably not a very good thing to make people go and rent from them. But I just thought it was very interesting, because it looks like, Boston is full of colleges and universities, and also full of pretty large, many of their triple deckers are quite, the individual units are quite large, and they probably have a similar issue with students and young people who don't always behave nicely. So just thought that would be an interesting thing to share.
Along those lines, how does, and I think this would be interesting for the Plan Commission discussion, is we have a nuisance premises ordinance, which, you know, in my reading lists those kinds of things. Are we enforcing our nuisance premises? And if not, why not? Or what are the challenges to that?
I'm going to let Angel talk more about that because she's
can
more
provide-
involved in it.
I can provide some information on that. So thus far, we have declared a couple of properties, problem properties. They've historically had police issues, arrests, violence, that type of thing. The property maintenance issues as they relate to the nuisance premise typically come into play because there are other issues. So the property standard stuff is called because of the other issues. But we've only declared a small handful, officially declared a small handful nuisance premise, and it comes through the police department. And the police have to issue the notice to the owner, and then the owner is brought in and has a meeting with the police officer and any other departments that they see fit based on what's going on at the property. And they have a plan that they come to agree upon to bring the property into compliance. But it comes through the police department.
Okay, because I know in reading the ordinance, there are like two categories of nuisance. There's, you know, if you've got a drug house, you know, so they're kind of criminal behavior where, you know, just one of those factors can, you know, result in being cited as a nuisance premise. And then it's a list of, you know, then you need two of another list of offenses. So I think that would be real, you know, just to, again, to inform the discussion, since while it doesn't specifically relate to the zoning ordinance and the zoning definition, as the city council grapples with this issue, and let's always keep in mind that the Plan Commission will make a recommendation with respect to the zoning language changes, but it's, you know, a lot of these other nuisance, you know, these other issues again relate to other sections of the code, and I think it will be very helpful, especially with the new council, that they have that all of these issues are presented in a kind of a cohesive fashion so that they can make a determination.
I agree. They work together. The doc from Boston and that Sarah was talking about today. And
Oh, sorry, Angel, breaking up a little.
in about the actions of the people. So it doesn't really have to.
Angel, you're breaking up a little bit.
We're breaking up,
might-
Angel.
Yeah, we
It might
can't
be
hear you.
useful to turn off your camera. That sometimes
In
helps.
terms of activity, people, it doesn't have to be. You know,
Oh, this still isn't working, Angel. I'm sorry. Okay. Any other questions at this point?
Can citizens ask questions?
Yes. We're
Okay,
just going to get there.
Okay.
So, Mr. Newman.
Yeah, I have two questions for staff. And I just want to premise this. In the universities that you studied, I haven't heard any talk about alcohol policies. And as everybody here, I hope knows, Northwestern does not allow alcohol on campus. I don't know what other universities do. And that pushes the parties into the residential neighborhood. So I want to know, number one, has there been any studies of the universities that have ordinances, how the universities treat alcohol and whether they allow it on their campus, which Northwestern doesn't. The second question is, has there been any study at all on parking? Because a problem in this city up until 1960 was that we never considered parking impact of zoning changes, and the property that is east of Ridge has in the first and in the third ward is heavily regulated for parking. Most of it is caused because the zoning ordinances before 1960 did not have parking requirements, and almost all the houses, and I say this as the former first ward alderman, and have two car garages. You put 8 people in there and they can get 8 cars on very tight parking right now. So I'd like to know whether or not any of the staff did any study whatsoever of the potential parking impact of going from 3 to 8 people. And 8 people, if they're students, they may have 8 cars. And I know that as a former alderman, and I'll explain that later and comment.
Okay, any other basic questions? I think at this point, I'd like to open it up for public comment. And Megan, do you have a list, or should we just have people raise their hands?
Yeah, I sent you an email with the list.
I'd like to get on the list if I could.
Are we
Yeah,
closing?
it's
things like-
fairly limited, but since I know there are a lot of people who probably wish to speak, we can go through the list, and then if there are additional people who wish to speak, we can go with the hand raising.
Okay, I'm not seeing the list, so would you like to go ahead and call names for me?
Yeah, sure. All right, first we've got Lynn Gindelman.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My introduction to all of this started last fall when my next door neighbor and I noticed that there were suddenly tons of cars parked on Sherman between Lincoln and Milburn. We later found out that the house 733 Lincoln, which is on the corner of Lincoln and Sherman, had been bought by somebody who converted it into housing for 9 students. As far as I know, he never even went through the process of getting it okayed. I think he just decided you build it out and you put an ad in, an online advertising. So, and I did confirm this with one of the tenants who was outside with his car, and he said, yeah, there are 9 tenants. So my first call then was to Judy Fisk, our then alderwoman, and she connected us to a couple more people on Lincoln who had been battling the same issue for years. We started getting the city involved, and much to our extreme disappointment, they slow walked it, gave excuses, did nothing basically, except some investigations and a few other things. But I think the bottom line is that the landlord, who clearly violated the law of the 3 unrelated people, will not have to pay a penny, nor will he, maybe other than a garbage citation, nothing, there will be no consequences to him. So that was bad enough. That was disappointing enough. But then in the last few months, I've discovered that not only has this issue become bigger and bigger with student housing proliferating, but it somehow got conflated with housing equity, which is to me, a totally unrelated subject, other than both have to do with housing. And I resent the fact that those of us who are trying to protect the first ward and our R1 housing code are somehow the bad guys because we're not being, I don't know, we're being selfish, to put it mildly. So what we would like to do is protect the integrity of our neighborhood. And we're all of us that's part of this movement, are all for housing equity, affordable and fair housing. But we don't want to see our neighborhood become one of rooming houses. And it's just that simple. Thank you very much. That's it.
I let.
Hi,
Okay,
Art.
So next we've got John Lessinger.
Hey, thanks for the time. Appreciate it. I want to echo Lynn's comments that was, quite accurate in terms of how I feel. And I think it's imperative we mention a couple things. So, and just to kind of bolster that argument. So like Lynn said, nobody, I don't think, I hope not, and nobody that I would align myself with is trying to stop the drumbeat of affordable housing. And like I said on the last meeting, Ward 1 has been the center for a lot of recent ward affordable housing. The HUD tower that's going up on the corner of Sherman and Emerson being the most recent example, and couldn't be happier about that. What I also haven't heard from anybody, city staff, council, whatever, is that we want to incentivize investors to displace single families to the benefit of student and out-of-town landlords. I think we can all agree that's not really in conjunction with the comprehensive plan, chapter 3. I certainly don't think it accomplishes anything referencing chapter 2 as well. And so I think just to level set, those are kind of two givens that at least what my understanding of the situation. So then you have to ask yourself, do we want to handle this one of two ways? Do we want to handle it by disincenting these types of situations from happening, i.e. stopping new landlords from coming in, buying and converting the properties? Or do we want to let that happen, assume things will go great, and if not, enforce that behavior via other codes, with the police being the people and doing that enforcement? And I think that's a no-brainer. Like, we absolutely don't want to put more on the police's shoulders in terms of enforcement. We don't want to turn Ward 1, Ward 7, and parts of Ward 5 into neighborhood snitches. We want to live in a place where neighbors get along, can have differences, but settle them without having to get those types of people involved. And so while I understand that it's up to the city council, it is absolutely imperative of this council or committee to come up with a creative solution that doesn't hamper the affordability and equity that we're trying to accomplish throughout Evanston, but that doesn't leave us as Ward 1, Ward 7, and Ward 5 residents out to dry, to the benefit of people that aren't even the constituents of the city, to be honest with you. So I'll shut up at this point, but there has to be a middle ground or a creative solution that doesn't leave us behind to the benefit of nobody on this call. So thank you.
Right. Next we have Karen Nelson.
Hi, thank you. I also want to echo the last two people's comments that, I absolutely am in support of affordable housing. Like John said, the new development that's going up at Sherman and Emerson, will have a great impact on the community and hopefully on affordable housing issues. But I think, like John said, I think the goals can be accomplished in a more narrowly tailored way. And I think this city is full of enlightened and educated and really creative people that I think we can come up with a better solution. Because as written, the proposed changes, or as I understand them to be, will result in a disproportional and adverse impact on the neighborhoods near the Northwestern campus. Here, where I live, the direct and immediate impact will not be to increase affordable housing to Evanston residents, but will be for absentee landlords to convert single-family homes into student housing and pocket excessive rents from these students. In fact, on every street around campus without the R1 designation, absentee landlords have converted a large portion of the single-family homes into student housing, and sadly have allowed the homes to deteriorate and become de facto student dormitories. As you can imagine, as we heard, the students don't take good care of the homes, and it turns out neither do their landlords. And outdoor and late night and even day parties have become the norm. We see this happen again and again during our 7 years of living near campus. And in fact, 2 formerly single-family homes in the non-R1 zone part of Orrington Avenue recently became student rentals. And these students, I mean, even last night, I heard them out there having loud parties, and they do it multiple times a week. We've avoided the issue in the R1 zone areas largely. There's plenty of on-campus and other housing available, but students choose to live off campus for the freedoms that allows, and we know alcohol is part of that. We moved here into this neighborhood, though, understanding that while it would be a regular occurrence to have, lots of students around and perhaps even parties, I also moved onto my street knowing it was an R1 zoned location and no student housing would occur here. As written, as proposed, I believe the new proposal would allow unrestrained frat parties to move in potentially next door to my house. I also, I'm asking to put a pause on the proposed proposal here and look for a more targeted approach to create affordable housing for Evanston residents and study the adverse impact it will have on the specific areas we've talked about today for specific reasons. One option might be to have a separate rule for areas, within a mile or within a half a mile of the Northwestern campus, because students, especially in the winter, don't want to walk that far. And then also, I also looked through the comprehensive general plan over the last few days and looked, and I don't believe that this proposal would be in compliance with the stated goals and objectives there, specifically with respect to maintaining the character of Evanston's neighborhoods. The city has agreed there's value in having historic neighborhoods, and keeping families within those neighborhoods is critical to maintaining the character of those neighborhoods. Without families here willing to maintain the homes and therefore the neighborhood, it'll become quickly overrun with absentee landlords and students. I noted that the general plan also noted that neighborhoods with large numbers of multiple family rental housing, like student housing, are particularly susceptible to deterioration due in part to the higher rate of tenant turnover that typically occurs with owner-occupied housing. I also don't believe it would be in compliance with the comprehensive general plan because it won't maintain or enhance the desirability of the existing housing stock. It won't maintain or enhance property values or positive perceptions of housing in Evanston. And it certainly won't preserve its historic residential architecture and ambiance as required by the CGP. So I again, propose sitting down and having multiple interests at the table to talk about what is working and not working and review other city ordinances. I also today actually looked at some other city ordinances. Philadelphia was one that I looked at where they have had issues. And surely we can come up with a solution here. I even volunteer my own time to address this issue. And I have 2 little kids, so I'm working mom. So I have very little extra time, but I volunteer my extra time for this important issue. And lastly, I'm a little concerned about the transparency with respect to this process. I think by proposing to change this ordinance and potentially the definition of family as it relates to this ordinance, and it would essentially change the definition of what an R1 and R2 zone are. And by changing the permitted, and also change the permitted uses within those zones. As such, I believe the city has an obligation to provide notice to all of those R1 and R2 zone residences within the city of Evanston. I'm not aware that they have. I certainly haven't received one, nor have my neighbors that will be affected by this essential rezoning of those properties. So I ask that the committee and staff remedy that so that we can have transparency on this topic amongst all the homeowners in R1 and R2 neighborhoods that would be affected by this change. Thanks.
Okay. I'll let Megan speak to the notice, how notice is handled for text amendments, which is different than a plan development, which would, provide notice to people immediately around. Also, I neglected to, note that the Plan Commission kind of has a rule to try to keep comments to 2 minutes. So that's on me. But if you could kind of, try to keep your comments to that so that others can speak as well, that would be appreciated.
Right. So with regards to the noticing for text amendments, we do not send mailed notices or the postcard notices that you may have received for other very targeted projects or construction or development. Since text amendments basically affects the entirety of the city, that would get extremely expensive. And this particular text amendment would affect all of the residentially zoned areas. We do have to submit a legal notice within a local paper. And then we also are required to post the meeting agenda and then items that'll be on the meeting at least 48 hours before. That typically happens at least the Friday before the Wednesday meetings. So those are the absolute requirements for text amendments. So this would not be, as Commissioner Linwall said, an instance where, say, with the proposed affordable building that's going up at Sherman and Emerson, where neighbors would get a postcard within 1,000 feet, because this is not a single parcel specific initiative. This would be for the whole city. So the requirements for that particular notice are a little different.
I'd also like to note that any resident can sign up to get notices of Plan Commission agendas. So the way to, if you don't want to watch every single city council meeting or look at their packets, you can get the agendas of Plan Commission meetings, and those would indicate what the text amendment, when they would be on an agenda. And then the zoning committee, I believe has a separate sign up as well.
Yeah, for this particular one, it's Plan Commission, Zoning Board, and our Design and Project Review Committee, I believe, are one listserv. So the Zoning Board is very site specific. But if you were interested in receiving some of that information, that would also be something that is provided if you sign up for that listserv. Into a question that's been asked within the chat. This was requested by Alderman Wilson in, I believe, September of 2020, and that was in the staff report, or in the, and actually in the presentation that I provided earlier. All right, so the next person signed up to speak is Bonnie Wilson.
I'm here. Hi, I'm here. I'm Bonnie Wilson. I live in the, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
I live in the first ward. As a real estate agent for over 35 years in Evanston, I live by our code of ethics and affirmatively committed to fair housing. While I am not an attorney, I cannot see how the unrelated person rule is consistent with any fair housing standards or protections based upon familiar status. Criteria for occupancy levels should be limited to safety and square footage. The relationship among those living together have nothing to do with safety or square footage. It is a different time now from when the 3 unrelated ordinance was enacted, because they now call it the brothel law. So you can see how old this ordinance is. The 3 unrelated ordinance is outdated and should be abolished. The city of Evanston should not be in a position of telling our residents who they can live with. In relationship to affordable housing, this will give more opportunities for families or individuals who are not related but want to live together because they cannot afford to live on their own. This can be anywhere in Evanston, from students to families who want to own or rent a house together. These residents can pool their resources together and enjoy living with people who care about each other, even if they are not related. Recently, there has been lots of chatter in the real estate industry of co-living. For instance, in the last few years, co-working has become very popular. Through our zoning law, we shall be encouraging alternative ways of living and not make them more difficult. I just want to remind everyone who received this, I believe you received this information today from, from the staff, from the North Shore Barrington Association of Realtors. This was given to you, this was given to the zoning committee in 2013 from our executive director at that time. So enough. We should not continue to talk about this ordinance, and please read these comments that were sent to you, because it really further explains how the real estate industry feels about this 3 unrelated ordinance. Thank you.
Okay, next on the list, we have Terry Dubin.
Thanks, Megan. Terry Dubin. I survived almost 30 years on the east end of the 5th Ward. I'm now in the 1st Ward. Form follows function. So said architect Lou Sullivan, many of whose designs were built here in Chicago. Design of buildings is affected by changes in the way we work and live. Elevators, now we can build taller buildings. Indoor plumbing, let's add a room to existing buildings and integrate rooms in new construction. The same principle of accommodating changes in the physical world must be applied to unit occupancy. Staff recommends removing the definition of family and basing occupancy on square footage and configuration to address, quote, systemic inequities that have disparate impact on lower income households, end quote. With the crisis level shortage of affordable housing in the city, we need to start to look at home sharing as a primary housing strategy for many types of non-traditional families and households. People working in Evanston who can't afford to live here, like minimum wage earners, or families who can make ends meet by sharing living expenses and babysitting costs, or empty nesters, sorry that they ever left the commune and want to get back together with friends to share costs and combat isolation. People with disabilities and fixed incomes who are looking for independent living situations, but will benefit from the financial support of roommates and the social and physical supports that come with living with other people. And finally, students who cannot find affordable apartments on their own, but could potentially afford roommate situations. Evanston has lots of housing stock, but because of some laws, like the 3 unrelated rule, we don't have enough housing. We hope that you will vote tonight to remove the definition of family and the 3 unrelated occupant regulation and base occupancy standards on square footage and unit configuration. Thank you very much. And I would just like to add to what Chairman Lindwall said at the beginning about the Supreme Court case, which said it was okay for cities to say how many people could live in a unit, that the dissenting opinion to that ruling was written by Thurgood Marshall. Thank you very much.
Right, next on the list, we have a Trudy Davis. Is Trudy on? Okay, I will go on to the next person. If Tree comes back on, I will go back to her. Next we've got Rob Beisenbach.
You're right. Hi, thank you. Throughout this debate and in some of the reports, we've heard a lot of speculation about what the impact of this repeal of this rule will be. We've heard a lot of assurances about law enforcement, but we don't have to deal in a world of abstract hypotheticals, because the impact of this rule change in the areas close to the university are clear, because they're happening right now. The future is the present. This is a picture from the neighborhood. This is not an outstanding or particularly unusual site in our neighborhood on any of the streets that are no longer designated R1. Foster, Sherman, a lot of the side streets between Sherman and Ridge, what you'll find is dilapidated housing stock, unkempt yards, overstuffed houses, loud parties, furniture, household furniture spilling out onto porches, lawns, and sidewalks. So I don't see how we can avoid that happening, because it's happening right now. We got these absentee landlords who are, as soon as this rule change is done, they will swoop in, they will buy up any house, any single family home that is sold, and they will do what they've been doing on these other streets. They will carve them up into tiny pieces and rent them out to students. They are not providing desperately needed affordable housing to Evanston residents. They are charging sometimes exorbitant rates of $1,000 to $1,100 a month to students to live in what is often a converted closet within a house. And that's not the future I want. We moved here in 2014 to raise a family, and my goal was to live here until they're out of the house. And honestly, if this is what things are going to look like, we've already thought about perhaps moving to a different part of Evanston or a different community. That makes me sad. And our concerns here are no major tragedy. They're certainly not on the scale of the people in the community who can barely afford a roof over their head. They need help. We need to help them, absolutely. But as the record plainly shows, for this part of Evanston, on the university's literal doorstep, the proposal under consideration will clearly not result in more affordable housing for members of our community, but instead fistfuls of dollars for predatory landlords. So we are asking for a careful study of the true impact of this rule change, and a compromise. Hopefully we can reach some kind of compromise that will be workable for all the parties. Thank you.
Mr. Beisenbach, before you go, I have a couple quick questions for you, if I
Sure.
could. So you showed us a picture of a house that had,
Yeah.
you shared that with us. How many units are in that building?
I don't know.
So you aren't going to know the answer to my second question, which is how many people are living in each of those units?
No.
Okay.
It's on a street that all the houses kind of look like this, and there's lots of people around. And
Right. I'm trying to get some reference points here. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. I don't think I see Trudy Davis. I'm going to go on to Peter Miller. No Peter Miller. All right. I will then go on to Jennifer Fewer Crystal.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Jen Foyer Crystal. I'm the Director of Housing Programs at Connections for the Homeless. And last time, Sabrina Redman, the manager of the Our House Transitional Living Program for young people, spoke at this commission, and she was sharing about how the 3 unrelated rule is affecting our ability to serve more young people that are experiencing homelessness in Evanston, age 18 to 24 in our program. So last time Commissioner Lindwall had mentioned the group home law, and we actually did research that, and that's specifically for people with disabilities. And we serve many young people without disabilities in our program that just have housing or homelessness issues happening. So that's actually not a good fit for us. And the ability to home share for young people, like many have talked about, can help with isolation and positive social connections, and also mostly financial. Being able to live with others is really important financially. And in our actual house, it's a huge 2-flat, but because we only have 2 kitchens, we can only serve 6 young people in that space living there. Although we have a basement that could, with 3 bedrooms, that could be used for 3 more young people experiencing homelessness in Evanston. And because of this law, it's stopping us from being able to serve those 3 young people that could be living in those last units. And this is a 24-hour supervised facility, and we very, very rarely ever get complaints from neighbors or anything like that. And so this is one of those situations where it's very much affecting people's livelihood, not being able to expand and have more people living there. And it's also just really important in general for the people we serve at Connections that are experiencing housing insecurity to be able to possibly live with friends, or sometimes 2 families living together. Sometimes that is more than 3 unrelated people living together. So we highly advocate for this changing, and for people that are unrelated, more than 3 people being able to live together in a dwelling unit. So thank you so much for the time.
I have a question.
Sure.
For you. How many, when your young adults transition out of your main program, how many roommates do they, is there kind of a typical number of people who live together?
So we do have an aftercare program where it is also, where it's 3, we have 2 units in the 5th ward where 3 people can live together. But there's definitely been relationships built in the house where there could be more than 3 people wanting to live together, even in a 2 or 3 bedroom where you have 2 twin beds in a room. Because at that age, privacy is important, but it's different than if you're older and maybe want more privacy. And that might be the only option for being able to live independently. So I could definitely see that where 4 or more people would want to live together.
Yeah, but do you have difficulty finding housing, like for 2 or 3 people? Or
Sometimes affordable for sure. Yeah, our aftercare program are just leases that we have ongoing, but yeah, we have a lot of young people that move out, and those units are full, and so we're helping them move into market rate units on their own sometimes, and it's very challenging. It's extremely challenging, and sometimes they do have to move out of Evanston.
Okay. The other question I've got, because I noticed that you got great press in the Tribune a while ago on the pandemic response, and so I noticed you had a single mom with 6 kids. That how do you deal with a lot of single parents with or just parents with multiple kids, and what kind of obstacles do you find in finding permanent housing for them?
It's extremely difficult. Some of the stuff Megan was talking about at the beginning, there's a lot of discrimination against single parents, and like it was specifically named with older teenage boys. And largely these families are Black and brown families, and there's discrimination in and of itself for those families. So it's extremely difficult. A lot of times people do have to move out of Evanston to find units that big. If we need a 3 or 4 bedroom. And then we do have a lot of landlord partners that we work with larger units. So it can be challenging. We do really try to overcome a lot of those challenges with support from the city and from many landlord partners, but there are oftentimes people do have to move out of Evanston to be able to afford one of those larger units, or even to find one where they can find a landlord that'll work with them. that comes up a lot.
Yeah, I think that's because that's come up in this
Mhm.
committee discussion before, where we have a lot of landlords, especially around the university, with the units that would
Mhm.
be appropriate, but rather than renting the units at a rent that a 1 or 2 income household could afford, they're
Mhm.
listing these properties at $6,000 or $7,000 a month, which
Mhm.
clearly would be very challenging for your population. And so one of my concerns is whether or not in whether or not you would be making it easier for those property owners to discriminate against families with kids that otherwise could use those units.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a byproduct, but I think there's a lot of benefits too for all of the people we serve, that to be able to decide who they want to live with and not be living in big units with not a lot of people, or trying to do this knowing that it is against city ordinance. Because we certainly, I'm sure there's lots of people that have to do this to survive, to live with more than 3 unrelated people in a unit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Sue Lowellbach.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sue Lowellbach. I also work at Connections for the Homeless. I'm the manager of advocacy there. And I head up our coalition that advocates for affordable housing, called Joining Forces for Affordable Housing. It appears that there are really 2 main issues that people are raising in favor of the 3 unrelated rule. One of them is basically student behavior, and the other is the related flipping of single family homes into student housing. And we completely sympathize with people who bought homes and did not envision living with these problems. However, we do not believe that the 3 unrelated rule is the way to solve them. Limiting the number of students who live in a building does not limit the number who show up to a party, stay overnight, or just come over to hang out. And the tension between student housing and single family housing near the university is not going to dissipate until Northwestern and the city work together to ensure that there's enough appropriate housing for students. The 3 unrelated rule cannot prevent absentee landlords. It cannot stop developers from buying single family homes. It cannot stop students from renting rooms in those houses. And it currently isn't even controlling the number of people living in the houses because it's so difficult and expensive to enforce. Joining Forces has done research into what other university towns have done, and many different strategies are being employed. While many towns do have similar rules to the 3 unrelated in place, none of them has actually solved the problem of student housing by using this rule. Some have even more restrictive rules. But the university towns that have been most successful that we found have engaged in collaboration between the city and the university to make sure that students have enough housing that is appropriate for them and that does not put them in direct conflict with their single family neighbors. That's actually in different neighborhoods. In the meantime, while this discussion is primarily focused on neighborhoods around the university, the 3 unrelated rule is an equity issue when it's applied throughout our entire community. Home sharing needs to become a primary strategy for affordability. We are in an affordable housing crisis. It appears that the main people suffering from this crisis in the first ward are students. However, half the households in Evanston are struggling with housing cost burden and can't afford their own apartments, much less their own houses. The ability to share homes is an ancient strategy of survival, and limiting this ability during a housing crisis is irresponsible. The fact that the 3 unrelated rule doesn't work to address student housing issues, but it does work to limit affordability is a real problem. We ask that the city remove this rule and look to other strategies that so many other university towns have been working on to address the very real concerns of the people in the first ward. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Nick Savloff. Okay, I see Nick Savloff on the call, might be muted.
Oh, yes. Hi, thank you. I mostly just want to join for the discussion. I wasn't sure if I would have something to speak about. So I didn't know if I had to submit in advance, but I would yield my time back to the group. I don't have a question at this time, but thank you.
Okay. All right, with that, I will go to Melinda Russo.
Hi, my name is Melinda Russo and I live in Evanston with my family. And in the interest of time, I'll keep my comments short and just say that I agree with the points that members of Joining Forces for Affordable Housing and other community members have made tonight in favor of an amendment to change the zoning ordinance regarding the definition of family. And I think that the committee should vote to recommend removing the 3 unrelated rule from zoning regulations. I believe that the valid concerns that community members have about repealing the rule should be addressed through other city regulations. And as someone else mentioned, creative regulations and creative solutions, and where issues involve students through a partnership between the city and Northwestern University. Thanks very much.
Okay, I don't think the 2 other people who signed up are on the call. So that's the end of the official list.
And I believe Art Newman wanted to speak. You're muted, Art.
I come to this as an alderman for 14 years of the First Ward, former chair of the Evanston Housing Commission, and the chair of the Evanston Parking Committee for 10 years. I can tell you that what several of the housing advocates told you tonight is just false. And I live in a building right now with students. I like students. But I want to just give you some specific examples. Number one, when I was alderman, I would get 2 to 3 calls a year that for people that wanted to buy up single family houses and rent them to students. I was very clear with the landlords and the speculators who called me that I would enforce the 3 unrelated rule. And if they did buy those houses, that they would not be able to rent them to 7 or 8 or 9 people. Now, and I did sit with Northwestern administrators once a month for 12 years, trying to get them to change the alcohol rule, which is unique to our situation. And I'll tell you what happened as a result of the alcohol rule. Go take a look at the lawns at Foster and Sherman. You'll find that there aren't any lawns on the housing there, just dirt. Okay, just dirt. I also found that, and I'll give you an example. When I got off the council, the most beautifully maintained 2149 Sherman property, it was owned by a wonderful man. He did magnificent landscaping. And when he got too old, he sold it. And it was bought by somebody in Northbrook. And within 6 months, there was the weeds were 7 or 8 inches. The bottom unit was boarded up because the glass was broken. And I had to write a letter to the Northbrook owner. And I asked them if they would want that type of property on their lawn. Now, these properties where I lived on 2145 Sherman, I had 3 bathrooms and I had 5 bedrooms and I had a basement. You changed this ordinance and I could have rented my house at 2123 Sherman for $8,000 a month. I could have gotten 8 people in there with 3 bathrooms. Now I only had a two-car parking garage, and you couldn't park on my street. So one of the things that happened in this city for a zillion years before 1960, we had no parking requirements. That's why you can't park. There's buildings in the third ward that have 100 units and 5 parking spaces. So the 3 unrelated stops landlords from speculating in our ward. Now, I don't know if you could do some type of overlay district or what, but I tell you, what you're considering here is incredibly serious. And I tell you it's serious because the people who own their home, it's sometimes their only asset. I had a woman who lived on the 2100 block of Sherman, and at 2107 or 2207, there was a house there. Yeah, there was a rape there. There was everything that went on there. She used to cry at night because of the noise. Do you know what the setbacks are on Sherman Avenue? It's about 4 or 5 feet to the next house. I walked in, I came back from a council meeting at 1 o'clock in the morning, and there was 200 people at 1945 Sherman having a party right in front of it. I mean, that's not how people want to live, and they don't want to call the police on their neighbors. They don't want to have to go to nuisance court to get everything done for them. Do you know what type of time that people have to spend to go to nuisance court on these 2 houses that the staff has brought? People who are living their lives and are busy don't want to do that. Now you, because of the proximity to the university, because they don't allow alcohol. And yes, there was a party one night where a single family mother in my ward had her door knocked down at 12 midnight because the people who wanted to get in thought that they had the wrong address for the party at Northwestern. Okay, we had to bring in social workers from the city to calm her down because she was so scared to live in her house. Now, the problems here are serious, and what you're going to do is you're going to create an economic incentive that will only exist within the 2 or 3 block neighborhood around the university. Now, before you consider this, I invite you to go negotiate with Northwestern University and have them change their alcohol policy so the residential neighborhoods won't be the reciprocal, the receptacle of the parties, because they can't drink alcohol on campus. I mean, this is what you're potentially doing to people that own houses here without any notice. Is probably more serious than anything you can possibly do. Now, in terms of affordable housing, okay, I want to see what affordable families are going to compete with $8,000 a month in my old house. Who's going to come up with that money? You're not going to have families. You're not going to have people of color. You're going to have the students at the university. They want to call it the brothel law. Let them call it that. And by the way, the speaker that came to you before, yes, Justice Marshall did dissent in the Belter case, but the majority opinion was written by Justice Douglas, who is one of the great champions of individual rights that has ever been on the Supreme Court. So what I would ask you to do, without a parking study here, go look at the parking regulations. I'll give you one thing that I had to do. I had David Jennings, who was the director of AMPW, count the number of cars that were registered at a property at Foster and Sherman. It had 12 units. There was 67 cars on the street. 67. Okay. Now when you live in a home, you want to have your guests be able to park in front of your house. You want to be able to sometimes bring your groceries in from the front of your house. So this ordinance in the university area will have a big effect on a very tight parking situation, heavily regulated already, because human nature knows a family has 3 kids. Okay, so they have 3 cars. 8 unrelated people from all over the country will have 7 cars. And they'll be able to get permits under our permit system because they have a residential address there. So I would ask you to really give pause to this. I supported affordable housing the entire time I was on the council. I support it today, but you have to look at the economics. You have to look at who will rent these houses, these big houses, and how are they kept up? And would you want to buy a house that's next to a nuisance house that has the type of picture that you had before? Or would you want to buy one that didn't have a front lawn? And I invite all of you to go over to Sherman and Foster to go look before you make this change. So I don't know what you can do. You want to do an overlay district in the university area? Great. But you can't make an open season and create an economic incentive for people to buy up single family houses on Orrington Avenue, on Sherman Avenue, on the streets in the Fifth Ward there, without really thinking about it and without studying parking, without looking at the alcohol issues. Has anybody on staff tried to negotiate with Northwestern on the alcohol policy? I struck out for 12 years. Okay, it's not even mentioned in your memo. So I really feel that this is something you're not going to get the affordable housing that you think you're going to get because of this, but you know that you will get more, you know that you will get houses bought up, and you'll potentially hurt the single family homeowners that have no idea that you're doing this right now. So thank you very much. I'm sorry if I took more than 2 minutes. I appreciate all the work of the staff. I'm not in any way, I know that you're very dedicated to the city, and I'm not in any way of, I know it's your recommendation. Alderman Wilson always wanted 4 unrelated. I don't know why he did, but he made the reference. But in my ward that I represented for 14 years, I can tell you that that you will get people, and the landlord industry loves it. Okay, you got 2 constituencies for this. The landlord, the real estate industry, they want to sell them. And then the students who a lot of them come from very wealthy families, and they want cheaper housing. Okay, sure they do. But they're not worried about the impact on their neighbors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any others? Anyone else? Oh, we do have a Gail Loban. Your hand is up.
I do want to implore that we try to speak to the 2-minute limit.
Yes,
there are a number of people on the
agree.
call who may want to speak. And I don't want everyone to be on the call for going well into the evening if everyone wants to say something.
Agreed.
Go over, yeah.
Thank you for everybody's time this evening. Mr. Rogers, I don't know how, given that you're new to the to the zoning committee, I don't know how much you've heard from residents. The last meeting, we spent a lot of time people detailing their nuisance issues and things that when former Alderman Newman just talked about somebody being woken up in the middle of the night. We heard a lot about that. We'd be happy to share. We'd be happy to walk you around our neighborhoods and then walk you over to near Fireman's Park, where that's exactly what's happened. Lots of student housing, it just keeps extending. But I just want to address a couple quick things. I'll try to keep it to 2 minutes. We also raised enforcement issues on the last call that we had, the last meeting. I'm just trying to figure out if we can't enforce I don't know how in the world you would be enforcing square footage. I mean, honestly, I just don't see, given the lack of enforcement now on so many various issues, that the city could be in the business of basically overseeing business operation from out of area investors. I mean, that's what it is. Anecdotally, and some people on this call have heard, the house next door to me and to Ken and Marcia, who are also on the line, was recently bought, and 2 bedrooms will put in the basement, and then being advertised for 6-bedroom unit rental at $6,800 a month starting July 1st. So these are not like made up numbers. These are real numbers that are out there. They also did that non-permitted, which Judy Fisk was able to help get the inspector in, which that in itself took quite some time to do, just with the way that we're set up. And I'd just like to also point out briefly that we can keep talking about Northwestern. We know that we're homeowners near Northwestern, but I'd like to, unless somebody here tonight is from Northwestern, again, that speaks to the irresponsibility of them being a good neighbor I don't think that they've been involved in this discussion this time around. And I just want to raise that I haven't heard from that at all, from them participating in this. I don't know much about the alcohol policy, Art. I know what it looks like outside. It's easy to tell where students live. It's easy to tell from the noise value that's out there. And just what it does toward the character of our neighborhood is, I mean, this is a street people love to run down. They love to take their kids down the street. We're in a historic district, and we're talking about undoing all of the things that that make Evanston, I think, so unique from to outsiders and to those who choose to live here. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? All right.
I could just respond real quick, Madam Chair. Although I am new to this committee, I'd like everyone to know that I served for 10 years on the Zoning Board of Appeals and have worked in land use in the city for 16 years. So I'm quite familiar with what is going on. I'm not necessarily familiar with everything that has happened in this particular proceeding, but I have read the minutes, things like that, watched the tape. So I'm not coming at this as a totally brand new situation.
Thank you. I appreciate knowing that. I didn't know your background,
Right,
and I
yeah.
appreciate that. Steve Sklar has his hand up, by the way. I don't know if you can see him.
And I will keep my comments brief. I am a resident in the 2100 block of Orrington. We've been here for almost 30 years. I will echo the same sentiments and support the comments made by people like Art Newman and the other residents. We experience that same thing on a daily basis, both down south on Orrington and directly behind us on Sherman Street. We regularly have to call the Evanston Police Department when the parties go late into the night, and we deal with all the other issues. I thought that Sue Lolenbach made some excellent points. However, I would disagree with the view that you change this rule and then look for creative strategies. I would suggest that we work on the creative strategies first and then convince the residents in the area that's most effective that some of these strategies will be effective. Taking the approach that we're going to change the rule and then figure out a way to prevent the ongoing deterioration and abuse of the neighborhoods is quite unrealistic, because once you have allowed that to take place, there's nobody that's going to take steps and move backwards. I'd also like to remind everybody about what happened a number of years ago on the location of Kendall College. When Kendall first was sold and was bought by a group of investors, they came to Evanston with a proposal that would have accommodated at least 100 people living in that area. And that was opposed by the neighborhood. It took several years until a compromise was reached. In my view, there's still too many houses there, but it's a long cry from what was originally attempted to pack people in. So my only point being that it is possible to work out some strategies that work to the benefit of the other people in the neighborhood. So I have submitted a written statement saying that I oppose the repeal of the law while supporting the other ideals of Evanston, but so many people have spoken very articulately this evening in favor of not changing the rule, and I wanted to voice my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else? Okay, in that case, I'd like to close public comment, and then
There are a couple more hands being raised. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Judy Lubin and Sarah Vander Wicken.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I was looking at over at my side rather than, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I just want to briefly say that I've listened to all the testimony and comments, and it's so striking that the people who are most concerned with eliminating the rule give examples of what's happening while the rule is in existence. So it's really obviously not working, and there must be a better way of addressing their concerns than this rule. That's all I wanted to say.
And Judy, go ahead.
I live right at the corner of Orrington and Noyes, and I love the university. I work with several student groups. They are great students, but they're students, and this stuff happens. And it happens most in areas, you know, down on Foster, where the rule, the requirements aren't the same. I really want to second what the speaker before Sarah said. It doesn't make any sense to undo the rule and then assume that we're going to try to figure out how this will all work. Could we figure out how this will all work before we get rid of the rule? Because it is a big change and it has major impact on the way the people who live in this general vicinity experience our own homes. Thank you.
All right, does that do it? Okay, thank you. Now I'd like to open up a discussion to the commission. I have a few questions for staff, that, but if I'll let Commissioner Rogers and Westerberg go first if you have questions or comments. Nope. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Commissioner Rogers at some point because you're new to this particular discussion. I'd like to get your input. But, I just want to say briefly, real estate is nothing if not about competing interests. And, we have students who want to find an affordable place to live near campus. We have investors who want to get a good return on their investment in properties. We have families and individuals who are trying to find a way to pool resources to get more affordable housing. And we have existing homeowners who would like to maintain their properties and the property values and the neighborhood that they bought into. So there's nothing wrong with any of these interests. The challenge, obviously, is trying to find a creative solution that minimizes the pain for everyone involved. That's not necessarily easy. I do agree that before we begin to change a rule, which may not be working very well, but at least acts as a deterrent in some respects, that we really think through what the impact of that will be on some of these specific neighborhoods. I'd also really love to understand how the change would really, from a quantifiable point of view, improve affordable housing options in other neighborhoods that may not have the problem in terms of university students. And I do think it would be helpful to be able to put that in front of the entire Plan Commission and before we can even make a decision, but to be able to point to that a little bit more. And those would be my comments, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I have a question that's kind of, I'd like to have staff weigh in on this. In the staff memos, you've talked about you're trying to address systemic inequities that have a disparate impact on lower income households, and people of color who are more likely to rent. And my question is, were you talking about households, families with kids, or are you talking about Northwestern students? Which group are you trying to address? So,
the disparate impact on lower income people can be of all types of lower income people. I haven't particularly studied the income of the students who are renting off campus versus living on campus, but the people that are finding it difficult to live in Evanston are all kinds of different households and family structures. One of the things that we have seen in some recent years, there is data that HUD has specially done by the census called the CHAS data, which is looks at housing and what the different types of problems that lower income people have finding housing and the quality of the housing. And one of the things that is consistent is the families with children that are needing large units are generally very low income. And they are not necessarily their issues are not going to be solved by any one thing, because none of the housing in Evanston, unless it is deeply subsidized, is affordable to them. Okay, so that's, but we have a lot of housing that is larger, has larger number of bedrooms, but most of that housing is not rental. So you've got basically all kinds of people in different situations who could be able to find more affordable housing if there were different kinds of options. There were, in one of the recent censuses, only 455 rental units in Evanston with 3 or more bedrooms. That has nothing to do with the total number of properties or dwelling units that have that many. It's the rental portion of it. So, it's not a simple answer. I hope that helps.
It helps. And I think that that's the kind of information that would be helpful for the commission to have for the next part of the discussion. The other thing, I'm curious about, I know we have a rental registration list. I don't know if that list is public, or I didn't see it online, or how, if somebody wanted to see where the the rental properties were, if that's accessible or would require a FOIA request. But one of the pieces of information I think would be helpful is to know how many single family rental properties are in the registry. And I think, along those lines, how many residential units, rental units are registered? Because I'd kind of like to know, how we're, whether or not we're capturing all of the rental units that the census says we have, or I'd kind of like to know how many you're catching and how many rental units just simply haven't registered. And I don't know if you have an answer to that.
That could be very difficult, because there are certainly people who are renting without us knowing about it. I think it's a thing that over time we get better and better and get more and more compliance. But I don't know if Angel Schnur wants to try to give any more detail on that right now. We can certainly try to look at some of these data for you, but
I think that would be helpful. And particularly, since, most people on the call have been talking about, students renting large houses. My concern is, as I've expressed, is making sure that we're matching the larger units to families rather than students necessarily, or single individuals. Because if you look at the units in the rental unit, you just think about what's been built over the last 20 years. You've got the E2, you've got the Reserve, you've got the Link, so there's been a lot of rental housing that's been built over the last 20 years that, when they go to the Plan Commission to get their development approved, they say, yes, we're either targeting, if it's close to campus, student households, or if it's farther away, we're getting the young folks just starting out in their careers that need affordable housing, which often translates into smaller units. But I'm not sure that we're in a situation necessarily where there's a huge shortage of housing for Northwestern students, for example. The university has built several dorms again over the last 20 years. So I mean, so I think that those data points and specific data points would be very helpful to have.
well, we can certainly try to get a lot of that for you. I don't know if we'll be able to get all of it. One of the things to note about we have had significant amount of new housing development, especially in the downtown, that has very small units, but overall, household sizes in Evanston skew small. One of the things that also happens that you sometimes find larger households of people with less means is they combine into larger households simply to get enough money to rent anything. And that's one of the things that Jen Foyer Crystal was talking about. That's the only way they can survive. That doesn't necessarily mean they want to always have as complex households as they have. That's one of the few ways they can afford it.
Okay, and I think, along those lines, I think it would be helpful for the commission to kind of know, you and I have discussed that, the HUD definition of housing for a family doesn't really include family, the married couple definitions. And I've looked at some others. I think it would be very helpful to have some examples of how family definitions have evolved to be more inclusive. I noticed in the census, we now have categories in a household. You can have, married, you can have the spouse, kid, child, relatives, people cohabiting. So, so you can have unmarried partners together. And I think that having those kinds of definitions would be helpful. There have been a couple that I came across that actually are, very closely mirror the definition that we have in our zoning ordinance. So depending on the federal or the state, the program involved, we may be, we're perfectly in line with certain regulations, but I think that the question for the commission to struggle with is how could we change our definition to accommodate some of the affordable housing needs of the community, while at the same time not encourage investors who really want to maximize their return on investment by, renting it at high rates to a group of students, when there may be, apartments or other rental housing options for that population. I think we want to kind of figure out who it is we're trying to establish the policy to help. So I think some of that would be very helpful for our discussion. And then I think finally, I really, I just don't see, I'd like, staff to kind of, explain how the proposed requiring all either, people when they're selling their houses or rental property owners to come up with their floor plans so you can calculate occupancy. I just, with 31,000 dwelling units, I just don't see that approach as really being very practical, especially since, I understand with accessory dwelling units that you may start getting that information as those begin to be developed, but they're not now. And I would also point out that right now in the zoning ordinance with the accessory dwelling unit, those require occupancy by a family. So that's one situation where you can't just, you've got to change that regulation too if you proceed down, or if the commission recommends proceeding to eliminate the definition of family. So I think, the last or a couple committee meetings ago, we asked for a list of all of the references to family in our zoning ordinance, what would be impacted, and that we haven't seen yet. And I think that the commission's going to, that's going to be important for the full commission to consider. So I just want to point out that the reason
for the ADU that the front term family was used was because we had to do that in order to say that they could rent to a family that was different from the family in the single family house. So that is simply because we use the term, we have to use it until it is no longer in effect, if that's what our zoning says. So we're kind of stuck with it, but you know, one of the good things about code nowadays is you can pull it out into a Word version and do a search. So we can probably, you know, we don't want to try to get every place where the word family appears, because in some places it may not have to do with that, but we can certainly try to find the major parts of the code that it would be affected.
Well, and just in clarification, that was the requirement that a unit be occupied by a family was a amendment made by the Plan Commission before that ordinance went to the City Council. So that was not that was a commission action, not part of something that staff did in the original ordinance.
Oh, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, to speak to that, there have been changes that have been made to zoning code, the city code, in various points that required us to do a deep dive of sorts to figure out where a particular wording change was referenced within the entire code. So that's happened before. We absolutely understand that this would be one of those instances where we would have to, at the very least, do a search and figure out where the substantive references to family are and what would need to be changed or updated if there's just a change to the wording even. But that's definitely possible to do. So
okay, and then
we've done it on a smaller scale with like minor changes to like the DAPPER committee that used to be the Spark committee. So you've done it on a smaller scale. We can definitely scale it up for something like this.
I think you just did it on the administrative review use too, it looks like. And I think the final question I have again for staff is, why do you believe that, with the larger, if you establish a limit of no more than 8 people living in a dwelling unit, and requiring any, the larger households to get a special or either a special use or a rooming house approval, why is that not discriminatory against families? I mean, traditional families with children, which would seem to be, why would that not violate our fair housing ordinance? And I'd kind of like to have, if it doesn't need to be tonight, but I think that that's something that we should be considered, because I have concerns over the alternate means of enforcing occupancy. Okay. Additional thoughts?
I was just waiting to find out if Ms. Flax was responding. I noticed she went off mute, so I didn't know if she had a response to what you were talking about or a comment. So I was just kind of waiting for her. Okay. As I mentioned, I'm kind of new to this discussion in a public forum. I've talked about this with various aldermen, various people over the years. Where I'm coming from on this is that obviously, based on the anecdotal stories that we've heard from people in and around the area, the 3 unrelated is not really being enforced. So the question is there a better way to find enforcement? And I think that we've conflated several issues into this discussion. And I don't know that all of them apply in this particular case. We've heard about the R1 residential district, about nuisances from weeds and broken windows and parking and noise and alcohol and large parties, affordable housing, a mother with 6 kids, all being kind of grouped together into one discussion. I mean, obviously the land use is what the zoning ordinance is intending to address. And it sounds like a number of the issues that are being raised are land use and violation of ordinance issues, as opposed to a 3 unrelated rule issue. I mean, my personal feeling, I would love to see us move toward a stronger enforcement and restriction based on size of units, size of bedrooms, you know, being able to enforce those things. I mean, one of our greatest problems in the city of Evanston always is our enforcement mechanisms. You know, we aren't able to enforce, go out and inspect and find out if 4 unrelated people are living in a room or in a unit. How do we find out if they're violating the square footage use? So any rule is only as good as the enforcement that comes along with it. I'm very opposed to an overlay district. I think overlay districts are horrible. I know we use them in the city of Evanston, I think way too much, because we start putting multiple layers of rules. And unless you know exactly what 3 levels down of rules you have to be looking at, we make land use for some people a little more difficult when they purchase properties, when they try to change properties. So I'm opposed to all overlay districts just on that. One of the other discussion points that came up was the effect that this would have on other districts. So again, we focused a lot very heavily on the R1, and I've heard mention of R2 as well. Obviously an R1 is a single family only district. R2, you start getting into multiple families there. When you get into some of the other districts, R4s, R5s, you're talking about multifamily units, and you're talking in some cases of very large buildings. As I mentioned, you know, we have buildings in my particular neighborhood where two units have been combined to make a much larger unit. So instead of having 2 2-bedrooms, you now have a 4-bedroom. And so in that sort of a situation, that's very different than a situation in an R1 where you have maybe a single family home that's a 3-bedroom home, and you start carving up and adding additional bedrooms in the basement, things like this. I don't know what the solution to it is, but I don't know that the 3 unrelated is the fix either. So I think what we need to do is look at and focus not so much, because I haven't heard a lot of discussion on the number of people that are living in units. I've heard a lot of discussion about the problems that come from these units. If there's literally 3 people living in an apartment, but I'm having 200 people over for a party, that's a problem. If I'm a single person and having 200 people over for a party, that is a problem for my neighbors as well. So I think we kind of need to sit and distill the solutions we're looking for. Do they address this problem, or is this a problem that we're able to group a bunch of things under and try to maintain it that way, if that makes sense?
Yes, I think it does. And I agree with you on the overlay districts. So I'm not particularly interested in those either. I've been struggling with trying to figure out how we can, you know, kind of distill this down to a couple of alternatives for us to, you know, consider. And on the one hand, we have the staff recommendation, which is to get rid of the family definition altogether and simply base the discussion on occupancy. And I think if you've read the minutes and listened to this discussion, I have particular concerns about what happens if you just get rid of the rule altogether. And particularly in terms of enforcement, since our property standards codes really, you know, the occupancy square footages are really minimum standards. They're not necessarily probably what most people think of as in terms of neighborhoods. You know, most people or many people have, you know, more space than they technically need to, you know, to meet the minimum occupancy requirements.
There are very few 70 square foot bedrooms in the city of Evanston, if anywhere, I'm sure.
I think I might have one, but still. But then I have some other larger ones. But the second option would be to keep the current definition, but or at least retain a family definition, and then to look at updating the language. I mean, can we have a broader definition of the type A and B family that really kind of covers the co-living, family home sharing by families or seniors, or other kinds of groups, that addresses the issues that led to the REBA fellowship definition, which somehow when reading it, it seems to have been related specifically to parking. And given current, the decline in automobile use, whether or not the parking is as big an issue as it was 20 years ago, I don't know. I can't speak to that. And then look at, and then retain the language and see how, and revisit this in a year or two to see if changes need to be made or tweaking. But the enforcement, and it is enforcement of other codes, not necessarily the zoning ordinance, because as you know, the zoning ordinance regulates land use primarily. But clearly there's an issue.
Well, and I'm thinking to a case that we had on ZBA a number of years ago, where someone was trying to convert a single family home, and it was in an R2 district, so they were able to make an additional unit. And the only reason they had to come to the city was for the parking issue. The parking is what triggered them having to come before ZBA and request a variance. So there are other means to address these nuisances that come up. So if parking is an issue, is there a way that parking can be used as a means to enforce what's happening in some of these units?
Yeah. But then, again, my other real concern, and this has kind of been for the whole thing, is, if we're promoting affordable housing, my experience, again, the need is for family housing. And, and I hate to see single family units taken out of that potential stock for families, just to allow, investors who want to maximize their return on investment.
I would agree with that on a certain level, but when we start bringing affordable housing into it, we aren't talking about a single family that's going to, a family with 6 kids who's looking for affordable housing is not going to purchase a house in the 2100 block of Orrington Avenue. So I think we have to be very careful about what we are conflating together. And I don't necessarily believe that the houses up near the university that are in an R1 district are going to be impacted by this on the affordable housing aspect of it. That's going to impact the buildings down in my neighborhood, that it's very multi-family units, tend to be maybe sometimes a little bit larger, bedrooms, that sort of things. So I think we have to kind of take the affordable housing, and I support the affordable housing. I don't want to say that I don't, but I don't think that argument comes into play when we're talking about an R1 home up near the university.
Well, except that there are other, there's an area of the 5th Ward kind of between Ridge and Sherman that actually is a traditional affordable neighborhood that, has long been an area for students. And that actually was an affordable neighborhood. And I think that there may be some opportunities if, again, if investors weren't trying to maximize their return, could be suitable for households with kids, if you could kind of if you could provide incentives for landlords to rent to families versus 6 students, might be might be helpful. And again, we're talking about rental housing, not owner occupied, really.
Right.
If we're talking affordable housing, because you're right. A low-income family is not likely to be buying on Orrington, although there are some affordable houses in that neighborhood as well. They're not all giant houses. Let's see, I see a hand. I see Gail Loban's hand is raised. Would you like to, I guess, weigh in? And then I think we can kind of wrap it. Then we'll need to wrap it up.
I'm just curious. A lot of this is new to me. I don't know what an overlay district is. And if somebody could clarify that.
Sure.
Thanks.
I don't mind jumping in to clarify. So what happens with an overlay district is, so you're an R1 district. That's your base district. What they do is you can create an overlay district, which kind of defines a different area, and you can impose more restrictions upon that. So for example, if we were to impose an overlay district on the area around the university that said, we're going to change this rule, but we will keep it in effect in this area, and outlined a different area, it's above and beyond what the base zoning is. So it might be an R1 underneath, it might be an R2 underneath, it could be a transition district underneath, but the rules are imposed over that whole area.
Yeah, so another example is along Central Street. When the Central Street plan was done, there was an overlay zoning district created, and so there are different rules for certain uses within various sections of Central Street. The difficulty is it's really hard for staff to keep track of what the rule is on a particular piece of property. So a lot of things fall through the cracks. So enforcement is very difficult. And again, it won't necessarily solve the issues that have been raised.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Commissioner Westerberg, thoughts?
Nothing new from, I think, what we've discussed at this point. It's there are a lot of issues that, this change is supposed to be able to affect, but I mean, that's the concern. I don't know that you can make everybody happy with this or even reach some of the goals that have been outlined. But I do think you need to think through what the implications are for the districts that could face some problems with investors. I would hope that wouldn't hold back everything for affordable housing. That's obviously important to keep pushing. I think it will take some time to come up with a creative solution. I guess that's it. And I would hesitate moving forward until that solution is a little bit more fleshed out.
I mean, I would just encourage us to look at moving forward on that, because this is a topic that's been in discussion for many, many, many years. And it always just sort of seems to come up and then it dies off, and then it comes up and then it dies off. And so I would encourage not just the three of us who are here, but all of the commissioners and the staff to look at trying to be creative in our solutions, to find a way to make things work, and to really focus in on what is the issue here and not get sidetracked by some of the side issues that we hear about, but can't necessarily be traced back directly to this particular rule.
No, I would agree.
Yeah, no, I think that we probably do need to move this to the commission for discussion. I don't think we're to the point where we have the creative solution or a recommendation to send to the city council, because I think in just reading and looking at all of the various parts of the city code, this is this is not just a matter of making a simple change in the zoning ordinance and then hoping that that everything will work out in the end,
Right.
Yeah, to that point, we do have a number of discussion points and points where we could get some additional information to have for the Plan Commission. And also to that point, we would have to notice for the Plan Commission meeting. So this would not be something that would happen in a couple of weeks. So there would be some additional time to get that information. Also to that point, somewhat, our rules do have some stipulations on the timing for review of some of these projects. We do have the ability to increase that time of review, but just in order to move this forward and to get some additional opinions and to try to have some additional discussion with more of the commissioners on some of those possible creative solutions, we can push this forward.
Okay. I think that, I think staff should take the time to do the research to get us some additional information, because I think that it's really important to understand, what, in part what the nature of this problem really is. How much affordable family housing do we need? How many single family rental units are we talking about in this city? All of which are, the larger units. I think that the more detail that you can provide in answers to the questions would be very helpful for the commission discussion. So I guess, my thought is that this should come back to the commission, but it shouldn't come back to the commission until staff actually has a report for us that responds to some of the questions that we've raised.
One of the other issues that I think is very important is the city, and this isn't a question that staff here is able to answer. This is really a council question in terms of funding and budgeting. Are they willing to put money into enforcement? Because any rule that is come up with is meaningless without enforcement. And so if we come up with the best solution in the world, but council doesn't intend to fund it because they just literally don't have enough people to do inspections, to do the visits to the properties, that sort of stuff, then we've again not accomplished anything, because it sounds like right now even this rule is not being enforced to the extent that it should be. And so we really would spend a bunch of time coming up with creative solutions only to be basically back where we are.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that was my concern about the approach to determining maximum occupancy of a particular unit, because I can't see the city council providing funding for a staff person to calculate unit occupancies when there are inspection issues that need to be addressed. So I think that the other part of the staff recommendation, you talk about, if we get rid of the family definition, it's that landlords will put all the students on the lease. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. So really kind of part of the discussion is, how much of what staff believes will happen as a result of eliminating the rule is wishful thinking, and how much is based on some degree of certainty.
I think we can come back with some specifics on that. But I must admit, it's a lot easier to measure a unit and figure out based on a calculation how many people, what the maximum occupancy load is, and perhaps even post it on each unit. And so then what you could, just as you do when you're renting a banquet hall, it says you can have maximum of this many people. So you can have a transparency. It could be much easier to show anybody renting what the maximum allowable is It's not really that difficult to do the calculations if you just have a floor plan. It's actually very difficult to, if you are an inspector going into a dwelling unit and you are trying to prove who is related to whom, it is incredibly difficult, because how are you going to do that? I know households that are people who are related by blood, but you may have 3 different last names in the same household. Now, what am I going to do? How do I prove that they're related? Do I get birth certificates? I mean, one of the fallacies of the 3 unrelated is that it's easy to, that it's something that you can easily prove. I mean, how do you prove that people are related by blood, marriage, or adoption without getting pretty personal, which these days, a lot of people don't really like to have you investigating that level of their personal life. And I don't know that it's appropriate personally. So I am not sure that the 3 unrelated is any, well, I'm sure the 3 unrelated is much more difficult for a property inspector coming in to determine whether or not somebody is, whether the occupancy is matching.
Yeah, again, my concern is, you don't have floor plans from the rental units that are registered now, and there are 14,000 renter occupied housing units now. There are 31,000 housing units in Evanston. So just the sheer volume, would be a challenge. I mean, I don't disagree that it'd be easy to, mathematically do the calculation. I'm just not sure that it's possible to do. And then I think the other point is that just kind of the type A and type B family as it's currently defined, both, envision children. So if you've got children, you can pretty much assume that you have a type A or B family without asking for marriage licenses. And I think that, if we broaden the definition of family, you may be able to get away with some of, proving the relationships.
Well, but you could also have a household of 5 adult people who could be family and are like third cousins. I mean, there is no definition of blood relationship, how closely anyone has to be related either. So it's a less than perfect thing to be able to prove, right. I think. So,
right. But I again, having some definition of family, again, it implies intent. What our neighborhoods are, our neighborhoods are comprised of primarily family households. And if you look at the census information, that's primarily the relationships there are in Evanston. So, but I think that having those numbers would be helpful background for the discussion that the commission's going to have as we struggle with a recommendation or an approach. Okay. Anybody else have something to add? I presume, Megan, you will, work out when you would have a staff report and then it would be noticed. And I guess the question is a particular, can this still be a discussion item? Because I don't think we have a direction yet. From the commission, because the commission really, we had one initial discussion and we have not had a discussion at the commission level. And how would you notice this?
It could be listed as a discussion item. I think depending on how far along we get, if we have alternatives to present, it can be added as new business and then discussed as needed.
Okay.
And go through that meeting process.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to have a couple of alternatives for us to consider.
Okay.
And if anyone has any other alternatives they'd like to suggest other than the 2 that I came up with.
I mean, again, my personal feeling is that the whole concept of family has changed so much. And, I will never be part of a traditional family by any means. But that doesn't, I think we need to focus in on the land use aspect of it. That's what I would like to see come from this, is the land use, not the relationship of the people occupying the building.
Okay.
Do we need to move this on to the whole
Yeah,
commission?
that was going to be my next comment, to have a vote to move it to plan commission with whatever conditions you see fit to add.
Is the plan just to move it forward for discussion at this point?
That would be my preference.
I mean, I'm fine with that. I'm just asking if that's the general feeling of the other people in the room. So, because if so, I will move that we advance this issue to the city, or to the plan commission for further discussion with staff creating additional notes based on the questions and comments that have been raised tonight.
I will second that motion.
Okay. Take the brief roll. Commissioner Westerberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers,
Yes.
Commissioner Lindwall.
Yes.
Right, that passes unanimously. To clarify the process, because I'm guessing there will probably be some people that have questions on that. Once a meeting date is decided, this will be noticed. You have a legal notice in the newspaper, as I mentioned previously, that we've done for text amendments. You'd have the information on our meeting agendas, which are typically posted the Fridays before the meetings. And we do have the listserv, which residents or anyone who is really interested in any of the meetings really can sign up to receive on the city's website.
Is there a possibility, Ms. Jones, you can put that link in the chat?
Yeah,
so that people don't have to go tracking it down, but can actually just click a link that you have or copy it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And I would encourage everybody to sign up so that you can follow this issue. And if any of you come up with creative ideas, feel free to leave a comment for us. Because as Commissioner Rogers stated, this has been an issue that periodically has come up for many years. And it would be really kind of nice to be able to come up with some sort of approach that better addresses the issue.
Excuse me, can you clarify what the new composition of the council, like who will be on the planning committee? Will be changing over, I guess, is my question.
I don't know that, the new council is installed, what, May 10th?
The new council comes in a week from
Yeah.
Monday,
Yeah.
and then they will have to figure out their committee assignments from there.
Right.
So,
Commissioner Lindwall, that's correct. The new council is installed on May 10th, and then there is likely rules committee on the second meeting in May. So I think that's the May 24th. And at that point, the council will decide which committees that they're appointed to for planning and development, administration, public works, et cetera.
Okay, looks like the link is there.
Yeah, so that is the link that will lead you to an actual sign up form, and you can choose to get the updates from Plan Commission, ZBA, and DAPR is the grouping for that. And that actually you can sign up for any other number of boards, commissions, ward updates through that link as well.
All right. I don't believe we have anything else on the agenda for this evening. Do we, Megan?
We do not.
Okay. Like to have a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
That can be a voice vote.
Oh, then I and Commissioner
Aye.
Rogers, welcome to your committee chairmanship.
Thank you, thank you. I may want to set up a time for you and I to just chat briefly, since that way I can kind of get up to speed on some things and everything, so.
I'm sure we can make that happen.
All right, so that motion passed. We are officially adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.